Welcome to the Mindful Spark. My name's Dave, and in this video we'll be covering the science from week 3 of the Reclaim Your Past, Reset Your Future series. This week is called Recognizing and Labeling Thoughts and Emotions. And we're going to explain the science behind that now and why that's beneficial. And the meditation then will teach how it can be done. So there was some researchers in Harvard, and they came up with a way of testing what people were thinking about. They had an app on people's phones, and it would ping them every now and again just to check and see what they were doing at that time. Was that what they were thinking about, or were they thinking about something else? And they actually found that 47% of the time, the people who were tested in the research program were actually thinking about either something in the past, something in the present, fantasy, but not what they were actually doing at the time. Now, this is very important because psychologists also know that the more we live in the past or live in the future and not in the present, the more likely we are to suffer from things like depression, anxiety, stress. And the more time we can spend living in the present, the more likely we are to be contented, to be happy, to be self-aware. Now, these scientists were very lucky because there was another scientist called Richie, who was a neuroscientist. And he discovered that in the brain, there were actually 2 different networks in the brain, 2 different parts of the brain that worked. So when we were thinking about something we were doing right now, he called it the task mode network. And when we were thinking about fantasies or future and past, he called it the default mode network. So the 2 networks, task mode and default mode networks. Now this backed up what the scientists in Harvard had found. Now also researchers discovered that maybe the lower activity in the right side hemisphere of the brain, which is more for open thinking, for maybe more fantasy, more projection, it shows possible significance in depression. When we can learn to recognize what we're thinking about, when we can label thoughts, then we can start recognizing when we're not here, when we've been pulled out of what we're doing and we're starting to relive our past or project into the future. And we get to ask ourselves, is that thinking helpful and relevant right now? And if it isn't, it's about learning to let it go. So when we can label what we're actually thinking, the types of thoughts we're having, we start learning to recognize, and it helps us to be able to bring us back into the present moment, which is very good for our well-being. Now, scientists have also researched, and they've discovered that when we can name an emotion, when we can give it a label, anger, sadness, fear, joy, it's very helpful, particularly with negative emotions, because as I showed in week 1 with the amygdala, or the emotional center, particularly the fear center of the brain, the more that's active, the more sensitive it becomes, and the larger, actually physically larger it becomes, because the brain will give more resources to it the more it's used. Now, the amygdala can be a bit like an alarm going off in the morning when you're trying to wake up. So it's beep, 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 warning, warning, warning. And when we can actually say, oh, anger, sadness, fear, and label it, the amygdala goes quiet, going, oh, I've told the upper part of the brain what's going on, now I can be quiet and they can deal with it. So being able to label an emotion, and they did this by putting on electrodes or EEG scanners onto people's heads, and they were also able to do it through functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI machines, which tracks the movement of blood around the brain. And they would show them pictures, say, of somebody angry or somebody very afraid. And they found that it would activate the amygdala when they'd see anger, but if they could actually say anger, then the amygdala became quieter again. That part of the brain became quiet. So when we can learn to recognize our thoughts, recognize our emotions and also recognize our bodily sensations. When our shoulders are getting raised, when our eyes are getting tight, when our stomach is getting tense, when we're breathing high in our chest. Then we can start recognizing, oh, we're going into the fight, flight, flop or freeze aspect of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. And we want to say, okay, I'm just going to breathe deeper, and that will bring us out of that and back into the rest and digest, feed and breathe. So by learning to recognize what's the activity in our body, we're able to balance out so many aspects. The default mode and the task mode network stop pulling against each other, and we can balance them out. We can start bringing up the rest and digest aspect, so therefore we're getting better hormones from our endocrine system. Our body is calming. So I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much.